I started taking the stairs because the elevator in our building had a mirror in it, and I didn't like how much time it gave me to look at my own face on the way down. 31 floors is a long ride, long enough that the silence stops being polite and starts being a question. The mirror was one of those bronze-tinted ones that flatter you in the morning and tell you the truth at night. And after a 10-hour day of reconciling client accounts, the truth was never something I wanted 30 floors to study. So I found the stairwell door at the end of the corridor, past the printer alcove and the kitchen nobody cleaned. And I started going down on my own 2 feet, in my own time, with nothing reflecting me back. My name is Nora, and I should tell you up front that I am a precise person. I count things. Not in a way that frightens anyone. I'm not muttering in corners. But my whole working life is built on the idea that numbers are supposed to agree with each other. And when they don't, somebody has to sit very still and find the place where the disagreement started. That somebody is me. I work in client reconciliation, which means I take what a company says it has and what the bank says it has, and I make them tell the same story, line by line, until the difference between them is zero. There is a particular kind of peace in a zero. It means nothing is missing. It means everything that left is accounted for somewhere else. I was good at it because I was patient, and because I lived alone and there was nothing pulling me home. I had a small apartment with a good chair and a few plants I kept alive out of duty more than affection. I had a routine that fit me like a coat tailored years ago, a little tight at the shoulders now, but mine. I ate the same 3 dinners on rotation. I knew the names of the building's security guards and they knew mine, and that was, if I'm honest, the closest thing to being known that I had going. I don't say this to be sad about it. I had arranged my life to ask very little of me, and in return, it gave me very little, and that arrangement felt fair. The stairs were part of the arrangement. After hours, when the floor had emptied and the overhead lights dropped to their half setting, I'd gather my bag, click off my monitor, and let myself into the stairwell. And for those 31 flights, I was the only thing moving in a building that had no further use for me that day. Nobody could email me in a stairwell. Nobody needed a number from me there. It was the one stretch of the day that was genuinely, completely my own. And I came to look forward to it, the way other people look forward to a glass of wine. You learn a building from its back stairs. The fronts of buildings are for clients, the backs are honest. The stairwell smelled faintly of concrete and the rubber of the handrails, and it had its own weather cooler than the offices, with a draft that came from somewhere I never located. The lights were on timers, motion-triggered, 1 bank per landing, and they had a particular habit I grew fond of. They'd light the flight ahead of me as I came down, sensing me, and then a flight or so behind me they'd click off, one after another, so that I was always walking in a small moving pocket of light, with darkness folding shut at my back. The first week it unsettled me. After that, it became almost tender, like the building was turning off the lights in rooms I'd finished with, the way you do walking through your own house at night. I never saw the cleaning crew, but I heard them. A vacuum 2 floors down, the squeak of a cartwheel, a radio playing something low and Spanish on 22. They worked the building like a tide, floor by floor, and I'd pass through the sound of them without ever meeting them, the way you pass through someone else's perfume in a hallway. Once I called out a quiet good night toward a vacuum, and it didn't stop, and I felt foolish, and I didn't do it again. The building at night was full of evidence of other people and empty of the people themselves. and that suited me. It was company without conversation. It was the exact amount of human I could manage. I want you to understand how ordinary all of this was, because what I'm going to tell you next only matters if you believe how carefully I'd measured my world before it stopped measuring true. It was a Thursday in February, late, well past 9. I'd stayed to close out a quarter for a client who transposed 2 figures back in November and never noticed, and the satisfaction of finding it had left me pleasantly empty. I started down the stairs the way I always did, and somewhere around the 10th floor I fell into the habit I'd never quite shaken, counting the flights. 2 flights per floor, a landing between, the number stenciled on the wall in that municipal sans serif. 9, 8, 7. It's not that I needed to count. It's that counting is what my mind does when I let it idle, the way some people hum. So I counted down through the lobby level, and then down past it, because the stairs kept going to the parking garage, and the garage was the bottom. It always had been. The sign on that landing said B, just B, for basement, for the 2 levels of parking where I didn't keep a car because I took the train. I'd reached that landing 100 times and turned around, because that was the end, and walked back up to the lobby to leave through the front. That Thursday, I reached the B landing, and the stairs kept going. I stopped with my hand on the rail. I'm not someone who startles, but I had a number in my head, basement, bottom, B, and the building had just disagreed with it. And disagreement is the one thing I am constitutionally unable to walk away from. Below the B landing, the steps continued down into a stairwell that looked exactly like the one I'd been descending. The same concrete, the same handrails, the same timer lights waiting in the dark. And on the wall, where the next number should have been, someone had painted over the original stencil and written a new one by hand. It said B1. I crouched to look at it the way I'd look at a ledger that didn't foot. Under the hand-painted B1, if you tilted your head, you could see the ghost of what had been there before. An older number, sanded and covered, the paint not quite opaque enough to hide that the building's own bones said something different than the label did. The new numbers were careful. Someone had used a stencil for the letters, but free-handed the digits. And the hand that did it had a particular slope to its work. A leftward lean I recognized the way you recognize a voice through a wall without making out the words. Familiar in a way I couldn't place, and didn't then try to. I should have gone back up. I want to be fair to the version of me standing on that landing and say that she did consider it. But consider what I am. A discrepancy had appeared between what the building claimed and what the building was, and somewhere below me was the place where that discrepancy started, and the entire shape of my life had trained me to go and sit very still in that place until it resolved. So I went down. The first thing I noticed was the warmth. A basement should get colder as you descend. Mine got warmer. Not hot, just wrong. Just a few degrees on the comfortable side of where the math put it. The warmth of a room someone has been sitting in. The draft I'd never located up in the proper stairwell was gone down here, and the air had a stillness to it, a held quality, like the inside of a closed book. By the time I reached the B1 landing, I'd unbuttoned my coat without deciding to. The second thing was the smell. The garage, 2 flights above, smelled of cold concrete and old motor oil, and the faint sourness of a place that's damp more often than it's dry. B1 smelled like clean laundry. I'm not reaching for a poetic comparison. It smelled precisely like the warm exhale of a dryer vent on a cold day. that specific softness of heated cotton and a little floral something, and there was no machine down there that could account for it. The walls had been freshly painted. Not freshly as in this decade. Freshly as in I could believe the painter had finished that afternoon. The white of it clean and untroubled. No scuffs. No scrapes. None of the long gray handprints that accumulate on a stairwell wall over 30 years of shoulders brushing past. That was what unsettled me most. Standing on B1, not the warmth or the smell, but the absence of time. A building keeps its age in its corners. Dust gathers, paint yellows, the rubber treads wear down in the center where the feet go. This stairwell had none of that. The corners were clean. The treads were unworn. It was as if these floors had been built last week, or had been used so gently by so few, that the years simply hadn't been able to get a grip. I went down to B2. The same. Warmer still, that clean laundry smell a degree stronger, the paint a degree fresher, and the silence so complete that I could hear the small sounds of my own body, the tick of my watch, the soft give of my coat, a swallow. The timer lights kept lighting the flight ahead and dimming the flight behind, and down here, that habit I'd found tender upstairs began to feel like something else. Up there, it was the building turning off rooms I'd finished with. Down here, it felt like the building was closing doors behind me, sealing the way back one flight at a time, and I had to turn around once to confirm the stairs were still there above me, faintly lit by the last bank that hadn't yet gone dark. They were. I told myself they were. I reached the B3 landing, and there was a door. The other landings had only had stairs, continuing down. This one had a door, an ordinary office door, the kind I walked through 50 times a day on the 31st floor, with a small wired glass window set at face height, and a handle worn to a soft shine. The light behind the wired glass was on. Warm, low, lamplight rather than the hard overhead kind, the color of a room where someone is reading. And on the door, painted in that same hand with the leftward lean, the same hand that had written the numbers on the walls, was the label, B3. I stood in front of it for a long time. I want to be exact about what I heard, because I went over it many times afterward, the way I'd go over a column of figures, and the sounds never changed no matter how often I added them up. I heard a water cooler. That particular sound, the deep glug of a bubble climbing up through the bottle, the gurgle and settle as the tank refills itself. It's a sound from 100 ordinary offices, and it stopped my breath completely, because there is no reason for a water cooler to be glugging in an empty room 3 floors below a basement at 9:30 on a Thursday night. It glugged and settled, and then, after a moment, it glugged again, topping itself off, refilling to a line I couldn't see, as if it had just been used and was quietly making itself full again. And under that, I heard a coat hook creak, the small, dry complaint of a metal hook taking or releasing a weight. One creak, the sound of something heavy being hung or just lifted away. The sound a coat makes when someone shrugs it onto a hook and lets go, and the hook settles under it. As if someone had been in that warm lamplit room a moment before I arrived, had just that second risen from the chair and hung up their coat, or taken it down, and stepped out of frame, leaving the cooler to fill itself back to the line in their absence. There was no one in the building below the lobby. I knew that the way I knew my own name. And yet, everything on the other side of that door said someone had been there a breath ago, and the warmth pressing through the wood said they might still be close enough to hear me if I knocked. I did not open the door. I'd like to give you some dramatic reason, a premonition, a voice telling me to run. The truth is plainer, and looking back, more frightening for being so plain. I didn't open it because I knew, with the same certainty I bring to a number that won't reconcile, that if I opened that door, I would not be able to make myself close it again and walk away unchanged. And I was not, that Thursday, ready to be changed. So I took my hand off the air where it had been reaching for the handle, and I turned, and I went back up. The lights came on ahead of me and went dark behind me the whole way, flight after flight, the pocket of light carrying me up past B2, past B1, past the painted-over numbers, up to the honest B of the parking garage, where the air went cold and oily and ordinary again. And I let myself out into the lobby and said good night to the guard, whose name was Marcus. And he said good night back and didn't notice anything, because there was nothing to notice. I rode the train home. I watered the plants I didn't love. I ate one of my 3 dinners. I lay in my good chair, and I did not sleep. What I did instead was the thing I am built to do. I counted. I counted the warmth that shouldn't have been there, and the clean laundry smell with no machine to make it, and the paint that hadn't had time to age, and the cooler filling itself in an empty room, and the coat hook creaking for a coat I hadn't seen. I added them up over and over, and they would not foot. There was a discrepancy at the bottom of my building, 3 floors below where the building ended, and it was written in a hand I almost recognized. And a precise person cannot live with a difference that won't go to 0. So I lay in the dark with my heart doing its quiet, even work. And instead of deciding never to go back, I started, without quite admitting it to myself, to count the days until I would. The second time I went down past the basement, I told myself I was only going to count the doors. And the third time I stopped lying to myself and opened one. It took me 11 days to get from the first night to the night I turned the handle, and I want to account for those days honestly, because they were not idle. They were the days of a person trying to talk herself out of something while quietly assembling everything she'd need to do it. I went down twice in that stretch and didn't open the door either time. I stood in front of it and listened, and both times the cooler glugged and topped itself off, and the lamplight lay warm and steady on the wired glass. And both times I told myself that listening was its own kind of reconciliation, that if I just gathered enough observations, I'd be able to add them into something that made sense without ever having to cross the threshold. That's the lie a careful person tells, that you can know a thing fully from outside it. You can't. At some point, the ledger requires you to open the box. So on the 11th night, I put my hand on the handle, and it was warm, not hot, just the warmth of a handle that someone else's hand had been on not long before. And I turned it, and it gave, and I went in. The room was so ordinary that for a moment my fear had nothing to hold on to. I think I'd been braced for something theatrical, something that announced itself as wrong, and instead I walked into an office. A small one, windowless of course, the kind of interior room a building tucks into its core for whoever drew the short straw. There was a desk, metal framed with a laminate top gone soft at the edges from years of forearms. There was a swivel chair, pushed back from the desk and turned a few degrees, the exact angle a chair ends up at when someone rises from it without bothering to tuck it in. There was a lamp, a green-shaded banker's lamp, the source of all that warm light, and it was on. A short bookshelf with binders. A coat hook on the back of the door. A water cooler in the corner, the big inverted bottle catching the lamplight and holding it gold. And on the desk, beside a stack of forms squared off with the kind of care I recognized, because it was my own care, there was a mug of coffee, and it was steaming. I stood very still and watched the steam come off it. Thin, unhurried ribbons, the way coffee steams when it's been poured 5 minutes ago and not 15. I did not touch it for a long time. When I finally laid 2 fingers against the ceramic, it was hot, properly hot, the heat of a fresh cup. And the surface of the coffee trembled faintly with the small vibration of my own hand on the desk. And I took my hand away and pressed it flat against my chest, as if I could quiet something there. There was no other door. There was no other way out of that room except the one I'd come in by, and I had been standing in the stairwell listening at that door not 3 minutes before, and no one had passed me. There was nowhere for the person who poured that coffee to have gone. And yet the chair was turned, and the coffee steamed, and the whole room had the particular held-breath quality of a place. Someone has just that second stepped out of gone to the restroom, gone to ask a colleague a question, gone for 30 seconds, and about to come back and find a stranger standing in the middle of their small, warm life. I made myself do what I do. I observed in order, without conclusions. The cooler first, because it was nearest, and because it was making its sound, that gentle, settling gurgle. There was a paper cone dispenser on its side, half full of cones, and I took one and filled it and drank, mostly because my mouth had gone dry and partly because I wanted to see the water level drop. It was good water, cold, faintly mineral. I watched the bottle. Where I'd drawn the water from, the level should have fallen. Even a little, a cup is a cup. It did not fall. The line where the water met the air inside the big bottle sat exactly where it had sat. And as I watched, a single fat bubble climbed up through it with a glug, and the cooler settled, and the line was the line. I filled another cone and drank that too, and another, 4 cups, 5, until my stomach was tight and cold with it, and the level never moved. It held at its fill line the way a number holds at 0. Nothing was missing. Everything that left was accounted for somewhere I couldn't see. Then the coat. There was a coat on the hook on the back of the door, and I had walked right past it coming in because the door had swung over it. And when I closed the door, I'd left it open, and the open dark of the stairwell behind me had started to feel like a held breath of its own. So I closed it. The coat swung into view, and I knew it before I let myself know it. It was a wool coat, charcoal, mid-length, with a slightly dropped shoulder and a belt that had never been buckled, but only ever tied because the buckle pinched. It was my coat, not a coat like mine. Mine. I knew the way the left pocket sagged from years of keys. I knew the small moth bite near the second buttonhole that I'd been meaning to mend for 2 winters. And I knew, when I made myself reach out and touch it, lay my whole palm flat against the back of it, the way you'd touch someone's shoulder to wake them gently, that it was warm. Body warm. The warmth of a coat that has just come off a back, that specific lived heat that lasts only a few minutes before the room takes it. I held my hand against it and felt the warmth fade under my palm exactly as fast as a real person's warmth fades. And I had the absurd, vertiginous urge to apologize to it for letting it get cold. I checked the buttons. I don't know why I needed to, except that I needed something to be different, something to prove it was only a twin, a coincidence, a coat that resembled mine the way 2 gray coats from the same chain store resemble each other. The top button, the second, the third, the 4th button was gone. There were 5 and there were 4, and the missing one was the 4th from the top, and there was a little frayed nub of thread where it had been. And I knew, the way I'd known the stairs kept going, the way I knew my own name, that I had lost the fourth button from my own charcoal coat sometime back in the autumn, on a train platform or a sidewalk, and never found it, and never replaced it. And that the coat on the hook had lost the same button in the same place, and had not replaced it either. I want to tell you I left then. I didn't. By the door, beside the coat, there was a clipboard. It hung on a second hook, a smaller one, and on it was a sign-out sheet. You've seen the kind, a grid of columns photocopied 100 generations down, so the lines have gone soft and gray. Name and date and time in and time out, and a wide column at the right for remarks. An ordinary office artifact, the sort of thing a building makes you fill in when you take a key or use a room after hours. I took it off the hook and held it under the green lamp. Every line was filled in, and every line was mine. My name written out in full at first, and then, as the eye traveled down, collapsing into the signature I've used since I was 19, the looping N, the dropped tail, the leftward lean. That lean. The same leftward lean as the painted numbers on the walls, the B1, the B2, the B3. The hand I'd recognized through a wall without being able to name. It was my hand. It had always been my hand. Line after line of my own signature, dozens of them, the small variations a real signature has from day to day. Hurried here, careful there. The ink occasionally skipping the way a pen skips when it's running low. And the dates ran forward. The top of the sheet started somewhere I half recognized, a date a few weeks back, around when the stairs had first kept going. But the entries marched down the page and out the far side of today. They did not stop at the present. They continued next week, the week after, dates I had not lived yet, each one signed in my hand, each time in and time out filled in as if I had already come down on all of those nights, signed in, sat in that chair, drunk from that cooler, and gone back up. The future was as full as the past. There was no gap at the present moment to mark where I actually stood. The line I would have signed tonight was already signed, in slightly hurried ink, as if I'd been in a rush going back up. I took the pen out of my bag. I don't know what I meant to do with it, compare, maybe. Hold my own pen up against the page to prove the inks were different. It was a cheap blue roller ball, the kind I buy in boxes of 12 because I lose them, and the ink in it was a particular blue, not quite navy, a little bright. I held it next to the sheet. Every entry on that page, past and future, was written in exactly that blue. The same not quite navy, the same brightness. The future dates, the ones I hadn't lived, were written in the ink of the pen that was, at that moment, in my hand. I put the clipboard back on its hook very carefully, the way you set something down when you've understood it might be load-bearing, and I left. I didn't run. I want that on the record. I turned off nothing, moved nothing, took nothing, and I closed the door behind me with the small gentleness you'd use on a sleeping house. And I went up through the pockets of light with the dark folding shut behind me. And I rode the train, and I did not sleep. And in the morning, I did the other thing I am built to do, which is to investigate in daylight what frightened me in the dark. I told myself daylight would dissolve it. It did the opposite. By day, the building was as ordinary as ever, and the ordinariness was the unbearable part. I went to facilities. There's a man named Errol who manages the building's systems, a patient man who likes being asked things, and I told him I'd gotten turned around in the stairwell and wound up somewhere below the garage. And could he tell me what was down there? He looked at me kindly, the way you look at someone who's tired, and he pulled the plans up on his monitor, the architectural set, and he turned the screen toward me. The building went down to be 2 levels of parking, and then it stopped. The drawings ended at a slab. There was no B1, no B2, no B3. He told me the elevator stopped at the basement because there was nothing below the basement to stop at. He showed me the elevator's own programming, the floor list, and it ended at B. He was not lying. There was nothing in his face but the mild concern of a helpful man for a coworker who seemed to need more sleep. And I thanked him and apologized for the bother, and felt the floor of my certainty tilt, because I trusted those drawings more than I trusted my own memory of standing in a warm, clean room 4 floors below where they said the building ended. I went further. The building was old enough to have had other lives, and there are records for that sort of thing if you're patient and pleasant and willing to spend a lunch hour in the kind of office where they keep them. I found an old tenant directory, decades old, the paper gone the color of weak tea, listing the firms that had rented here when the building was young. Most of the names meant nothing, but there was a line, halfway down, for a small concern that had taken a partial floor for a few years, and then vanished. And the contact name listed for it stopped my eye the way the stairs had stopped my hand. It was almost my name. Not quite. The same first name spelled a hair differently, an older spelling, and a surname that rhymed with mine and shared its first 3 letters, and was not mine. A name a generation or 2 upstream of my own, the kind of name I might have been given if I'd been born earlier into the same family that named me. I sat with that directory for a long time, in the flat, fair light of a records office, and I could not make it foot. And for the first time in my careful life, I began to suspect that some discrepancies are not errors to be found and corrected but doors, and that I had already walked through one. That night I went down again. I had to. You understand by now that I had to. The room was the same, the lamp, the chair turned a few degrees, the coffee steaming as if freshly poured, the coat warm on the hook minus its 4th button, the cooler holding at its line. I went straight to the clipboard, and I found the place where the dates crossed out of the past and into the weeks I hadn't reached, and I ran my finger down them slowly, reading the small variations in my own hand, until I came to a line dated the coming Tuesday. It was already signed. Of course it was. They all were. But beside this one, out in the wide remarks column where the other lines were blank, there was a note, in my handwriting, in that bright, not quite navy blue. 4 words written a little hurriedly, as if added at the last second on the way out the door. It said, "Remember to feed her." I stood under the green lamp and read it again, and a 3rd time, and the cooler glugged and settled behind me, and the coat cooled on its hook, and I felt the room waiting around me with its terrible patience. I had no memory of writing those words. I had no idea, none, who asterisk her was, whether it was a person, or the cat I had not yet met, or the cooler, or the coat, or the room itself, or the next woman to come down these stairs counting flights. I only knew that the instruction was mine, that I had left it for myself, and that some part of me out ahead in the dates I hadn't lived already knew the answer I didn't. I put the clipboard back on its hook. I climbed up through the closing dark, and I carried those 4 words home with me, and I lay in my good chair through the small hours turning them over the way I'd turn a figure that won't reconcile. Remember to feed her. Remember to feed her. And they would not go to 0. And they kept me from sleep for a week. There was a cat on B3, gray as dishwater, and it was sitting on the sign-out desk like it had been waiting there through every date I hadn't lived yet. It hadn't been there before. I want to be precise about that, because precision is the only tool I trusted by then, and I had cataloged that room, the lamp, the binders, the squared-off forms. The chair turned its few degrees. The way I'd catalog a set of accounts I expected to be tampered with. There had never been a cat. And now there was one, settled on the desk beside the clipboard, with its paws folded under its chest in that loaf-shaped cats make when they have decided nothing is going to happen that requires standing. And it looked at me with the mild, unsurprised attention of an animal greeting someone it sees every day at the same hour. It did not startle. I want that on the record too, because everything in that room had always been arranged to suggest a person who had just left. And the cat was the first thing down there that behaved like something staying. It blinked at me, slow, the long, luxurious blink a cat gives you when it's comfortable. And then it looked toward the corner, pointedly, the way you'd nod at something across a room. And I followed its look and saw a bowl on the floor by the cooler that I would have sworn was not there the night before. The bowl was full. Dry food, the small brown kind, heaped to the rim. I crossed to it and crouched, the way I'd crouched at the painted-over number on the wall all those weeks ago, and I looked at it the way I look at a balance I distrust. While I watched, the cat hopped down, no hurry, a soft thud of a landing heavier than a creature that size should make, and walked to the bowl and ate. Not greedily. A few measured bites, the sound of small teeth on kibble, and then it stepped back and sat and washed one paw, and the bowl was full again. Not refilled, full. The level had not dropped while it ate, and it had not risen after. It simply held, heaped to the rim, the way the cooler held at its line, the way a number holds at 0. Nothing was missing. Everything that left had been accounted for somewhere I couldn't see. I understood then who Asterisker was. Not all the way, not yet, but the first edge of it. Remember to feed her. I had written that to myself, in my own bright blue ink, on a Tuesday I hadn't reached. And here was the bowl that never emptied and the animal that ate from it anyway. And somewhere in the part of me that keeps the books, I felt a line move toward reconciling that had been refusing to for a week. The cat finished washing and walked, unhurried, to the back of the door, and jumped, that same heavy, soft landing, onto the seat of nothing, onto the air, no, onto the coat. It had nosed the charcoal coat half off its hook, so that it pooled on the floor against the wall, and it climbed into the wool of it and turned around twice and lay down, curled into the exact warm place where I knew without touching it the coat was warmest. It tucked its nose under its tail and closed its eyes, and it lay there in my coat, in the body warmth of a body that was mine and was not in the room. And it sighed the way an animal sighs when it has come home. I sat down in the swivel chair. I hadn't sat in it before. I'd touched everything in that room by then, but I had never once let myself sit, because sitting felt like agreeing to something, and I was a person who read every line before she signed. But my legs had gone uncertain under me, and the chair was there, turned to its few degrees, still holding, I thought, the faint warmth of the last person to rise from it, and I sat. And the room arranged itself around me, the way a room does when you take the seat it was built for. And in the stillness, the cat told me something. I have gone over how to say this more times than I have gone over anything in my life, and I still don't have the words right, because words are exactly what it wasn't. The cat did not speak. Its mouth didn't move. There was no voice, no sound at all in that held and laundry-warm air except the cooler settling and the small machine of my own heart. What happened was interior. A sentence arrived in me fully formed, the way a smell can arrive and bring a whole year of your childhood with it before you've named it, not heard but recognized, not learned but remembered. It came in my own voice, the voice you hear when you read silently, and it said, "You're not lost. You've been here before, and every time you were kind to yourself." I want to tell you I wept, or that I was afraid, because those are the things a person is supposed to do. I didn't, and I wasn't. For the first time since the stairs had kept going on that Thursday in February, the dread that had been sitting on my chest like a hand simply lifted, the way a fever breaks, the way a number you've been hunting for an hour finally appears in a column you checked 4 times. It wasn't a comfort given to me by a stranger. That was the whole of it, the thing that undid the fear. It was a thing I already knew, handed back to me by something that had been keeping it safe. You only feel relief like that when the source is yourself, when the kindness comes from inside the house. And sitting there in the warm chair with the cat asleep in my coat, I let the pattern finish resolving. The way you finally let yourself read the total at the bottom of a page you've been adding up a line at a time, afraid of it. The handwriting was mine because it was mine. I had kept circling that like it was a riddle. How can my signature be on dates I haven't reached? And the answer was not how. The answer was that the question had a wrong word in it. The dates weren't predictions. Nothing down here was predicting anything. A prediction is a guess about a road you haven't walked, and these were not guesses. They were a record. The future entries on that sheet were as solid and finished as the past ones because they had already happened, were happening, would happen, in the flat, strange way that all of it happened down here, where the cooler never fell, and the coffee never cooled past steaming. I hadn't been reading my fortune. I'd been reading my own diary, kept in my own hand, of a route I had already walked and would walk again. And the only reason it ran forward off the edge of today was that down here today wasn't a wall. It was just a landing, with the stairs going on past it. I had been leaving things for myself. That was what the room was. Every impossible mercy in it I had finally understood as a thing left, deliberately, by a careful hand. The coat kept warm so that whoever came after would not be cold. The cooler topped to its line so that whoever came after would not go thirsty, would have, in fact, the specific small reassurance of a thing that does not run out, which is the rarest reassurance there is. The coffee poured 5 minutes before arrival, every time, so the room would always say someone was just here. You are not the first. You are expected. The note in the margin, asterisk, remember to feed her. So the cat would not go hungry in the gap between one of me and the next. I had been finding the things I left, and I had been leaving the things I would find. And the loop closed so smoothly that there was no seam in it anywhere. No place where you could put a fingernail and say here, this is where it starts. There was no one who came before me. I had spent 11 days, and then more days building a stranger in my mind, a predecessor, the woman whose coat this was, whose coffee steamed, whose chair still held her warmth, and the old tenant directory with the name a hair off from mine had let me keep believing it, had let me think I was following someone down. I was. I just hadn't understood that following her and being her were the same motion, separated only by a few turns of the same stair. The someone who came before was me, shifted by one phase of the loop, one revolution ahead, leaving the room warm behind her exactly as I would leave it warm behind me for the one who was, at that moment, 11 days into talking herself out of opening the door. I was the followed, and the follower at once. I was the warmth and the cold hand reaching for it. The name in the directory wasn't an ancestor. It was just my own name as it had been spelled the last time the loop came around, worn a little. The way a word goes soft when it's photocopied 100 generations down. And the terrible thing, except it had stopped, sitting there, being entirely terrible, was that this was the only thing that made the loop bearable. A loop with no kindness in it would be a trap, a sealed box, a woman walking down stairs forever into a cold room to find a colder one. But every turn left mercy for the next turn. That was the whole architecture of it. Each of me, arriving frightened and alone 3 floors below where the building was supposed to end, found that someone with her exact handwriting had already been there and had thought of her, had kept the coat warm and the water high, and fed the cat, and left a note so she wouldn't feel like the only living thing in the dark. The loop didn't trap you and then comfort you despite itself. The comfort was the trap, and the trap was the comfort, and I could no longer tell you which one I'd walked into, only that it had been built by someone who loved me as much as anyone ever had, which is to say by me, which is to say by no one else at all. The cat slept on. The cooler glugged once and settled. I sat for a long time in the warm chair feeling of all the things I might have expected to feel down there, accompanied the exact amount of human I could manage, finally and permanently arranged. A company without conversation that would never once need a number from me or look too long at my face in a mirror. After a while I stood, because I am still, even now, the kind of person who reads to the bottom of the page. I took the clipboard off its small hook and brought it under the green lamp. I ran my finger down the dates the way I had before, past the ones I'd lived and into the ones I hadn't, the small variations in my own blue hand, hurried here, careful there. Remember to feed her on the coming Tuesday in the margin. And then a few lines on, a few dates further into the weeks ahead, the entries kept their rhythm, name, date, time in, time out, and then they didn't. There was a last filled line. I found it the way you find the place a ledger stops, where the careful columns simply end and the ruled grid keeps going underneath them, waiting, expecting more. Above that line, every row was signed, every time out filled, every visit closed out tidily, the books of all those nights brought to 0. And below it the page was blank. Not torn off, not run out, there were lines left, the soft gray photocopied rows marching on down to the bottom of the sheet, but empty. The signatures stopped, and the first empty row sat just beneath the last full one, ruled and ready. The little box for the date open, the wide remarks column white. I understood what the blank line was without anyone, cat or otherwise, having to tell me. I'd spent my whole working life looking for the place where 2 stories stopped agreeing, the exact line where what a thing claimed and what a thing was came apart. And here it was, ruled in soft gray under a green lamp 3 floors below the bottom of my building. Every line above it was a visit. Someone came down, signed in, sat in the warm chair, drank from the cooler that didn't empty, and climbed back up through the closing dark, and the time out got filled because she left. That was what a filled line meant. She left. The blank line was where you stopped being the one who came after. If I signed it, if I came down on that date and put my looping N and my dropped tail in that empty box, there would be no one to fill the time out because I would not climb back up. I would be the one who stayed. I would become the warmth in the coat for whoever came down next, the steam still rising off a cup I'd poured 5 minutes before her arrival. The full bowl, the kept room, the proof that she was expected, and was not the first, and was not alone. The note in the margin would be in my hand, because it would be my hand that left it. I would stop being the woman following herself down the stairs, and become, at last and forever, the her who had come before. I stood under the lamp with the clipboard in both hands and the cat, asleep in my coat, and the cooler holding at its line. And I looked at the first blank line beneath all my own signatures. And I understood, without any panic at all, that to sign it was to stay, to give up the climb and the cold apartment and the 3 dinners and the train, and to become the kindness left waiting on the next warm coat for whoever came after me down into the dark. The last time I went down, I brought my own pen, because I had finally decided that this was the visit where I would choose something. I want to be careful about the word asterisk decided asterisk, because for weeks I hadn't been deciding anything. I'd been observing. That's a different thing, and a person can hide inside the difference for a long time. Observing lets you stand in a warm room 4 floors below where your building ends, holding a clipboard with your own future on it, and call yourself uncommitted. I had been telling myself I was still gathering, still reconciling, still reading every line before I signed. But there was only one line left to read, and it was blank, and you cannot reconcile a blank. At some point, a thing stops being an observation you're allowed to keep turning over and becomes a question with your name in the answer. So I brought my pen. Not the cheap blue roller ball from the box of 12. I'd come to distrust that one, the way you'd distrust a key that opens a door you don't remember locking. I brought a different pen, black, one I'd had for years and never lost, and I put it in my coat pocket, and I went down on purpose. The building had never been so empty. I'd worked late 100 times and learned the particular emptiness of each hour, the 9 o'clock emptiness that still has a few stragglers in it, the 10 o'clock emptiness when the cleaning crew is a tide 2 floors below, the 11 o'clock emptiness that is just you and the hum. This was past all of those. The floor lights were at their lowest setting, almost off, just enough to find the edges of things by. The vacuum I always heard was silent. The radio on 22 was silent. Even the hum that I'd stopped noticing years ago, the hum a tall building makes the way a sleeping body makes warmth, seemed to have dropped to something below hearing. I let myself into the stairwell, and for the first time in all those flights, I felt the building had no one in it at all but me, and the one I was going down to meet, who was also me, a few turns ahead. The timer lights had changed their habit. I noticed it around the 20th floor and made myself stop and watch, because a careful person confirms a thing before she lets herself feel it. The lights still came on ahead of me as I descended, sensing me, lighting the flight before I reached it. But behind me, they were holding. Up there in the proper stairwell, all those months ago, the light of flight behind me would click off almost the moment I left it, the darkness folding shut at my back, so close, I sometimes felt it on my neck. Now the light behind me waited. It stayed lit a beat longer than it needed to. 2 beats, 3. As if the building were reluctant to close the room I'd just left. As if it wanted to keep the way back open a little while in case I turned around. Or as if it had simply gotten used to me, the way you leave the hall light on for someone you expect home. I stood between the lit flight ahead and the lit flight behind, held in a longer pocket of light than I'd ever had. And I understood that the place had started, in its patient way, to keep me company, to accompany me down. And I was grateful, and the gratitude frightened me more than the dark ever had, because gratitude is how you agree to things. Past the lobby, past the honest bee of the garage, the cold, oily, ordinary air of it, the last place the building's own bones agreed with its labels. Past the painted-over numbers in the hand with the leftward lean that I no longer found uncanny, because it was only my own hand, reaching back to leave me a sign. B1, the warmth coming up to meet me. B2, the clean laundry smell. B3, and the door with its wired glass window, lit gold and low. And behind it, everything waiting exactly as I'd left it, and exactly as I would leave it again. The cat was on the desk. The coffee steamed. The coat hung warm on its hook, 4 buttons where there should be 5. The cooler held at its line, and I stood in the doorway and let myself feel, fully and without arguing, how much I wanted to stay. I had spent so long being afraid of that room that I'd never let myself add up what it was actually offering. And standing there with my own black pen in my pocket, I finally did the sum. Upstairs, I had a life that asked very little of me and gave me very little back, and I had called that arrangement fair. I had 3 dinners, and a good chair, and 2 security guards who knew my name, and I'd told you, and told myself, that this was the exact amount of human I could manage. But here was a room that knew I was coming. Here was coffee poured 5 minutes before I arrived, every single time, by someone who had thought about the hour of my arrival and wanted the cup to be hot for me. Here was water that never fell below its line, food that never emptied from the bowl, a coat that was always warm, a small gray animal that greeted me at the same hour with the calm of long habit. Here, I was expected. Not tolerated, not accommodated, expected, the way you are expected at a table that has set a place for you. Upstairs, if I vanished, the numbers would foot without me by the end of the week, and the building would not feel my absence in its corners. Down here, I was the absence the room was built around. I was the warmth they were all waiting on. To stay was not to die. I want to be honest about that, because the easy version of this story is one where the room is a trap with teeth, and it wasn't. To stay was to belong, softly and permanently, to be the one thing in the world that never runs out and is never alone. I have wanted very few things in my life as plainly as I wanted, in that doorway, to set down the climb forever, and let the room close gently around me like a coat. The cat watched me want it. It didn't tell me anything this time. It had told me the one thing already: you're not lost. You've been here before, and every time you were kind to yourself. And I think it understood that the rest was mine to add up, that some totals you have to reach in your own hand, or they don't count. So I made myself look, one more time and properly, at where all that comfort came from. The coffee was hot because someone had poured it 5 minutes before I came, and chosen not to drink it. The coat was warm because someone had worn it down here against the cold of the climb, and then taken it off and left it on the hook, given up its warmth, so that the next one wouldn't be cold. The cooler held at its line because someone kept topping it, cone by cone, and never let herself watch it drop. The bowl was full because someone fed the cat and went away hungry herself, somewhere up the stairs, into the 3 dinners and the good chair. Every single mercy in that room was a thing that had been asterisk handed forward, not kept. That was the whole architecture of it, the thing I'd seen the shape of weeks ago and only now felt the weight of. The room never depleted because no one who came through it ever stayed to consume it. The warmth survived precisely because each of us had chosen not to keep it. The instant someone signed the blank line and stayed, The instant someone decided to stop climbing back up and just be the warmth, to settle into the coat and drink the coffee and possess the comfort instead of passing it on, that was the instant the handing forward stopped. The coat would go cold on a body that never rose. The coffee would be drunk and not repoured. The cat would not be fed by someone on her way out the door, because there would be no one on her way out the door. To stay was not to join the kindness. To stay was to end it. The loop was bearable, was even beautiful, only because every turn of it refused itself the one thing it most wanted, and gave that thing to the next turn instead. I had received all of it. Years of it, lives of it, a whole descending history of women with my handwriting keeping the room warm for me. And the only way to honor what I'd been given was not to keep it. Was, in fact, the opposite of keeping it. So I did the work, the way I do work in order, without hurrying. I filled the cooler first. I drew cone after cone of cold mineral water and tipped them back into the reservoir, though it never needed it, though the line never moved, because the gesture was the point, and the next one would know the gesture had been made. I topped it to the line and passed the line until I was sure, the way you make sure of a figure you care about by checking it from both directions. Then the coat. I took it down off the hook. It was warm, body warm, my own coat with its sagging left pocket and its 4 buttons. And I didn't put it on, because putting it on was the first inch of staying. I draped it over the back of the swivel chair instead, arranged it the way you'd arrange a coat over the shoulders of someone who'd fallen asleep at a desk. The collar turned up a little, the warm inside of it facing out and ready, so that whoever came down next and was cold from the stairs would find it warm and waiting, and would not, for one moment, have to be cold. Then the cat. I crouched at the bowl that was already full, and I fed it anyway, the way I'd written I should remember to feed her. I'd carried a small handful of food down in my pocket along with the pen, and I added it to the heap that didn't need adding to. And the gray cat came and ate a few measured bites, and let me put my hand flat on its back once, and it was warm and real, and it leaned into my palm the exact amount a cat leans. No more. The precise small affection I could manage, given back to me. I told it goodbye without words, because words weren't the language of that room. I think it knew. I think it had said goodbye to a long line of me and would say it to a long line more, and that it didn't grieve any of us, because none of us ever quite left and none of us ever quite stayed. And then the clipboard. I took it down under the green lamp one last time. I found the last filled line, every visit above it closed out tidy, every time out filled, because each of those women had left. And I found the blank line beneath, ruled and waiting, the little date box open, the wide remarks column white. I took out my own black pen, and in the remarks column of that blank line, not in the name box, not the date, not a signature, nothing that would close the visit or open it, nothing the loop could read as she came. She stayed. I wrote one thing in black ink that matched nothing else on the page, so she would know it was left on purpose and not just another turn of the wheel. I wrote, "You don't have to stay to be kind. Fill it for the next one and go home." Then I put the pen back in my pocket, and I left the line unsigned, and I hung the clipboard on its hook, and I turned off nothing, and I moved nothing else, and I went to the door. The cat had climbed into the coat where it lay over the chair and curled into the warm of it and closed its eyes. The cooler glugged once and settled at its line. The room held its breath the way it always had, saying someone was just here, asterisk. And for the first time, the someone it meant was me. And I was the one leaving the warmth instead of finding it. And that turned out to be the only difference that had ever mattered. I climbed up through the longer pockets of light, and the building kept each flight lit behind me a beat longer than it needed to, the whole way, and I let it. I didn't look back to see the dark folds shut. I went up past B2 and B1 and the painted numbers, up into the honest cold B of the garage, up into the lobby, and Marcus wasn't on that night. It was someone newer whose name I didn't know yet, and I said goodnight anyway and meant it. And I went out into a city that ran on ordinary time, where the coffee goes cold and the water runs out, and no one is waiting. And that is simply how it is up here. And I found that I could bear it, that I'd always been able to bear it. That bearing it was its own kind of warmth, the kind you make yourself, the kind that depletes, which is the only kind that's really yours. I take the elevator now. I want you to know that. I ride it all 31 floors, and I look at my own face in the bronze-tinted mirror the whole way down, and I don't flinch from it anymore, because I know now that the face is kind. I've watched it be kind across more turns than I can count. There's nothing in it to be afraid of. Some mornings I put on my coat, and it's warmer than the weather can account for. Warm on the inside as if a body had just left it. And I don't take it off, and I don't investigate. Some mornings, there's a single gray hair on my sleeve, cat gray, dishwater gray, and I leave it there. I never found out whether I broke the loop or only softened it, whether some last woman with my handwriting finally read the black ink line and filled the cooler and went home and turned off the lamp behind her, or whether it's still down there, still turning, a little gentler now, each of us keeping the next one warm forever. I used to think I couldn't live without that number going to 0. I was wrong about that, the way I was wrong about so much of it. I leave the blank line blank, in my mind, every night before I sleep. I picture it ruled and white and unsigned. And I climb back into the world carrying a warmth I chose not to keep, and a question I have finally stopped needing to answer. And I sleep, and I don't dream of stairs.